Welcome. Before we begin, take a moment and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story traveled far, beyond one place or one time. Today's video explores Bella Adams, the brown-eyed girl who changed everyone she met, a true and unsettling historical mystery uncovered through deep research, archived records, and overlooked testimonies. If you value stories built on real data, rare sources, and careful fact-finding, make sure to subscribe, because each video takes hours of digging into history that many never question, but should. America in 1893 was a nation standing on the edge of certainty and terror, a place where progress marched forward in steel and steam, while fear whispered through churches, newspapers, and family dinner tables. The country celebrated invention, electric lights, railroads, and factories, yet most people still explained the unknown through belief rather than science. Illness, unusual behavior, or physical differences were rarely understood medically. Instead, they were often seen as signs from God, curses, or warnings. Faith filled the gaps where knowledge failed, and fear grew wherever belief offered no comfort. Religion dominated daily life, especially in small towns and rural communities. Churches were not just places of worship but centers of authority, shaping how people judged right and wrong, normal and unnatural. Sermons warned of divine punishment and moral decay, reinforcing the idea that anything unusual had meaning beyond human control. A child who behaved differently or appeared out of place could quickly become the subject of spiritual concern. In such an atmosphere, belief was not optional. It was the lens through which the world was seen. Scientific understanding existed, but it was limited and unevenly trusted. Psychology was in its infancy. Medicine lacked clear explanations for many conditions, and genetics was not yet understood. Doctors often contradicted one another, and their conclusions were frequently ignored if they clashed with religious or cultural beliefs. When science failed to give clear answers, people turned back to superstition. Fear filled the silence left by uncertainty, and rumor often carried more weight than evidence. The Panic of 1893 deepened the nation's anxiety. As banks collapsed, jobs vanished, and families were pushed into desperation. Economic fear blended with spiritual dread, creating a society constantly searching for reasons behind its suffering. Many believed unseen forces were at work, punishment for sins, omens of worse to come. In times of crisis, people became more suspicious of difference, more eager to find meaning in anything that stood apart from the ordinary. Social conformity was rigid and unforgiving, especially for women and children. Behavior, appearance, and manners were closely observed, and deviation invited judgment. A girl was expected to be quiet, obedient, and predictable. Any child who disrupted these expectations through presence, behavior, or unexplained influence was quickly labeled strange. Fear did not always show itself as violence. Often it appeared as whispers, avoidance, and silent exclusion. Newspapers played a powerful role in shaping public fear, mixing factual reporting with sensational storytelling. Headlines blurred the line between truth and exaggeration, turning human differences into spectacles. Stories of unnatural, children divine signs, or unexplained phenomena sold papers and fueled imagination. Once a narrative took hold, it rarely faded. Public opinion hardened quickly, leaving little room for compassion or rational inquiry. In this world ruled by belief and fear, mystery had power, and those who embodied it could never live quietly. America in 1893 was not prepared to understand what it could not name. Instead of asking careful questions, society reacted with suspicion, awe, and dread. It was within this fragile, fearful landscape that lives could be altered forever simply by being different, simply by existing beyond explanation. Bella Adams' early childhood was wrapped in mystery from the moment she entered the world, and those closest to her sensed it almost immediately. Born in 1893, at a time when every detail of a child's behavior was scrutinized, Bella did not arrive with anything visibly monstrous or alarming. Yet people often remarked that something about her felt unsettlingly different. It wasn't a deformity or illness, it was an indefinable presence that adults struggled to put into words, and that inability alone planted the first seeds of fear. As an infant, Bella displayed an unusual calm, rarely crying in ways expected of newborns. Neighbors and relatives whispered about how she seemed to watch rather than react, her brown eyes lingering on faces longer than was considered normal. In an era that believed infants were blank slates, such attentiveness felt unnatural. Some interpreted it as a sign of intelligence, others as something far more troubling. From the beginning, Bella was observed not with affection alone, but with suspicion. By early childhood, her behavior deepened the unease. Bella reportedly spoke less than other children, yet when she did, her words carried an emotional weight that startled adults. She seemed to understand grief, fear, and joy beyond her years. People who interacted with her often left conversations feeling shaken, reflective, or inexplicably changed. No one could explain how a child so young could affect grown men and women so deeply, and no explanation meant fear took its place. Her family found themselves caught between love and confusion. They saw Bella as gentle and thoughtful, but they could not ignore how others reacted to her. Visitors grew uncomfortable, playmates were quietly kept away, and rumors began forming beyond the household walls. In 1893, families depended heavily on community acceptance, and Bella's difference threatened that fragile social standing. What began as concern slowly turned into isolation. Medical opinions offered no clarity, only contradiction. Some doctors dismissed concerns entirely, claiming imagination and exaggeration. Others hinted at nervous conditions or unnamed psychological irregularities, terms that sounded authoritative but explained nothing. With no clear diagnosis, her parents were left alone with unanswered questions. Each failed explanation made Bella's presence feel more mysterious, and mystery in that era was dangerous. Religious interpretations soon followed, as they often did when science faltered. Some believed Bella was touched by God, gifted with a sensitivity others lacked. Others feared the opposite, that she carried something unnatural within her. These opposing beliefs created tension around her existence. A child could not simply be different in 1893. She had to mean something, and meaning often came with judgment. By the time Bella reached the edge of adolescence, her childhood mystery had already shaped her fate. She was no longer seen as merely a girl, but as a question no one could answer. In a society desperate for certainty, Bella Adams represented the unbearable unknown. And long before she could understand it herself, her early years had already changed not only her life, but the lives of everyone who encountered her. The significance of Bella Adams' brown eyes became the center of every whispered conversation, because in 1893, eyes were believed to reveal the soul. While brown eyes were not rare, Bella's were described as unusually deep, steady, and expressive, holding a gaze far longer than what made people comfortable. Adults often reported the same feeling after meeting her, as if they had been truly seen, examined, or quietly judged by a child who should not possess such awareness. People noticed how her eyes seemed to change the mood of a room. Conversations slowed, laughter faded, and even confident adults became uneasy under her gaze. Some claimed her eyes reflected emotions she herself did not express, sorrow, understanding, or an unsettling calm. In an age obsessed with physiognomy, the belief that physical features revealed character, Bella's eyes became proof to many that something extraordinary lay beneath the surface. Religious communities quickly assigned meaning to her gaze. Some ministers suggested her eyes were a sign of divine insight, a child granted spiritual sight beyond ordinary people. Others warned that such intensity in a young girl was unnatural, even dangerous. Sermons began to include vague references to children of signs, and though Bella's name was rarely spoken aloud, everyone knew who was being discussed. Scientific thinkers of the era offered their own flawed theories. A few doctors suggested heightened perception or abnormal neurological development, though they lacked the language or tools to explain it. Others leaned on pseudoscience, claiming her eyes indicated inherited traits or evolutionary anomalies. None of these explanations satisfied the public, and uncertainty only magnified fear. Children reacted to Bella differently than adults, often avoiding her without understanding why. Playmates complained that she made them uncomfortable simply by watching them. Parents interpreted this avoidance as instinct, proof that even children sensed something was off. Bella's brown eyes, once simply a feature of her face, became a reason to keep distance. Over time, stories about her eyes grew exaggerated, as rumors always do. Some claimed she could sense grief before it was spoken. Others believed she could expose secrets without a word. Whether true or not, these tales spread quickly, transforming Bella's gaze into a symbol of something almost supernatural. Each retelling pushed her further from normal childhood. In a society ruled by belief, Bella Adams' brown eyes were never allowed to remain ordinary. They became mirrors for fear, faith, and imagination. Instead of being seen as a child, she was reduced to a sign, an omen, a mystery. And once her eyes were labeled extraordinary, there was no way for Bella to escape the meaning others forced upon them. The first encounters with Bella Adams left lasting impressions that adults struggled to explain, often long after the meeting had ended. People expected a quiet, forgettable child, but instead found themselves unsettled by how deeply the interaction lingered in their minds. A brief greeting, a shared moment of silence, or a single sentence spoken by Bella seemed to carry unusual weight. Adults walked away feeling thoughtful, uneasy, or emotionally exposed, unable to explain why a child had affected them so strongly. Neighbors who met her for the first time often reported the same reaction, a sudden awareness of their own thoughts and emotions. Some felt an unexplainable sadness, others a strange sense of calm mixed with discomfort. These reactions were not dramatic or outwardly visible, which made them even more disturbing. There was no clear cause, no strange behavior to point to, only an internal shift that people could not name. Authority figures were especially shaken by these encounters. Teachers, church elders, and respected community members found themselves at a loss when interacting with Bella. Used to guiding and correcting children, they instead felt observed. Her quiet presence challenged their sense of control, and in a society built on hierarchy, this reversal was deeply unsettling. Rather than question their own reactions, many concluded that the child herself must be the cause. Some adults attempted to test her, engaging Bella in conversation or deliberately watching her reactions. Yet these efforts only deepened the mystery. She responded politely, sometimes thoughtfully, but never in a way that explained the intensity others felt around her. The absence of clear evidence made people more uneasy than any visible strangeness could have. Word of these encounters spread quickly through the community, passed along in hushed tones and half-finished sentences. Each retelling added a layer of unease, even when the details were vague. People began avoiding Bella not because of something she did, but because of how they felt afterward. Fear did not require proof. It only required repetition. For Bella's family, these reactions were painful and confusing. They watched guests grow quiet, visits shorten, and invitations disappear. They loved their child, yet could not deny the pattern forming around her. In a time when community acceptance was survival, this silent withdrawal carried real consequences. Those first encounters marked the beginning of Bella Adams' transformation in the public eye. She was no longer seen as a girl, but as an experience, something people felt rather than understood. And in 1893 America, when feelings outweighed reason, that distinction was enough to set her apart forever. Strange reactions from strangers became one of the most disturbing patterns in Bella Adams' life, because they occurred without warning and without explanation. People who had never heard her name, never been told her story, still responded to her in remarkably similar ways. A passerby would pause mid-step. A shopkeeper would fall silent. A visitor would leave abruptly, each interaction brief, yet emotionally charged. The consistency of these reactions made them impossible to ignore. Some strangers described an overwhelming sense of unease, as though they had walked into a private moment they were not meant to witness. Others felt an unexpected sadness, a heaviness that followed them for hours or even days. These emotions were deeply personal, yet shared across individuals who had nothing in common except a single encounter with Bella. In a rational world, such coincidences might be dismissed, but in 1893, they demanded meaning. There were also those who reacted with sudden kindness or protectiveness, compelled to speak gently or offer help without knowing why. This, too, unsettled the community. A child who could inspire fear was troubling. A child who could quietly command empathy from strangers was something else entirely. People questioned whether these reactions came from Bella or from something working through her. Adults often attempted to hide their responses, embarrassed by emotions they could not control. A grown man disturbed by a child's presence challenged the era's rigid expectations of authority and masculinity. Rather than admit vulnerability, many chose to distance themselves, avoiding Bella altogether. Silence became a form of self-defense. Rumors quickly filled the space left by unanswered questions. Some claimed Bella could sense guilt. Others believed she reflected a person's inner self back at them. Each new theory grew more dramatic than the last. Strangers no longer arrived as blank slates. They came prepared to feel something, which only reinforced the cycle of reaction and belief. Bella herself seemed unaware of the impact she had, continuing to behave with quiet politeness. She did not seek attention, nor did she respond dramatically to others' discomfort. This lack of reaction confused people further. If she was not trying to cause these effects, then what was she? In a society guided by fear of the unknown, strangers became unwilling witnesses to Bella Adams' mystery. Their reactions, spontaneous and uncoordinated, convinced the community that something extraordinary surrounded her. And with each new stranger affected, belief hardened into certainty, whether justified or not. Whispers and rumors followed Bella Adams like a shadow, spreading faster than truth ever could in 1893. What began as quiet concern between neighbors slowly transformed into a web of half-spoken fears and exaggerated stories. People lowered their voices when her name was mentioned, as though speaking too loudly might invite something unwanted. In small communities, rumor was power, and Bella had become its center. Each telling of the story changed slightly, shaped by the speaker's beliefs and fears. One person claimed Bella could sense sorrow. Another insisted she brought misfortune, while some swore she carried a divine presence. None of these claims were based on evidence, yet repetition gave them weight. The more uncertain the facts, the more elaborate the rumors became. Religious fear blended easily with superstition, creating narratives that felt authoritative simply because they aligned with existing beliefs. Whispers suggested Bella was a sign, either of God's favor or of hidden sin within the community. Parents warned their children to keep their distance, not out of cruelty, but out of fear of the unknown. Protection and punishment blurred into the same action. Rumors did not stay confined to private conversations, slowly seeping into public behavior. Invitations stopped coming. People crossed the street to avoid passing her. Even casual kindness began to feel risky. Bella was not openly accused of anything, yet she was treated as though guilt were already established. The lack of official explanation only strengthened the gossip. Without doctors, clergy, or authorities offering clarity, the community filled the silence themselves. Each unanswered question was an open door for imagination. Truth requires patience. Rumor thrives on urgency. Bella's family felt the weight of these whispers most sharply as they watched trust erode around them. Friends grew distant, allies remained silent, and support became conditional. To defend Bella was to invite suspicion, and many chose safety over loyalty. By the time the rumors fully took hold, Bella Adams' reputation no longer belonged to her. It had been reshaped by fear, belief, and imagination. In 1893, that was enough to define a life, regardless of innocence. Religious interpretations of Bella Adams grew increasingly intense as the years passed, because in 1893, anything that defied explanation was automatically linked to the divine or the diabolical. Clergy and devout community members searched for meaning in her presence, her gaze, and even her silence. Some claimed Bella was chosen by God to reveal hidden truths, while others feared she was an omen of misfortune. In both cases, faith filled the gaps left by reason, and Bella became the focus of moral speculation. Sermons and private prayers often referenced children like Bella, though rarely by name. Religious leaders spoke of signs of gifts and of tests of faith. Parishioners whispered that she possessed insight beyond her years, an intuitive understanding of guilt, sorrow, and human weakness. These beliefs lent her an almost supernatural aura, convincing some that she had a higher purpose or knowledge forbidden to ordinary people. Families in the community were influenced by these interpretations, sometimes treating Bella with reverence, other times with caution or avoidance. Parents instructed their own children to be polite, yet wary, and neighbors debated whether the girl should be allowed to participate in church or public events. Religious fear became a social force, subtly reshaping interactions and expectations around her. Even scientific minds of the era struggled to reconcile faith with observation, leaving space for religious speculation to dominate. Doctors and psychologists could offer no satisfying explanation for her effect on others, so clergy often became the unofficial authorities. Their interpretations, moral, spiritual, or mystical, carried more weight than any clinical assessment. Bella herself appeared unaffected by the religious scrutiny, continuing her quiet, observant behavior. She did not engage in arguments or attempt to assert a special identity, which only made her presence feel more enigmatic. The contrast between her ordinary actions and the extraordinary interpretations imposed on her strengthened the sense that something beyond the natural world was at work. Communities often polarized over these interpretations, with some praising her as a divine gift and others fearing her as a sign of moral decay. In both cases, the girl's existence became inseparable from religious meaning. Whether deserved or imagined, faith dictated not only how she was seen, but how she could safely exist in society. By tying Bella Adams to spiritual interpretations, the Society of 1893 effectively codified her mystery, making it impossible for adults to perceive her as simply a child. Every glance, word, or action was filtered through lenses of fear, belief, and morality. In this environment, the extraordinary nature of Bella Adams was no longer just personal, it was communal, spiritual, and enduring. Scientific confusion of the era only deepened the mystery surrounding Bella Adams, as late 19th century medicine and psychology were still struggling to define what was normal behavior or development. Doctors could describe symptoms, list anomalies, and speculate on inherited traits, but they had no framework to explain the emotional impact a child could have on adults and strangers alike. Bella's presence defied categorization, leaving physicians baffled and frustrated. Medical opinions were often contradictory, with some doctors claiming she might be extraordinarily perceptive, others suggesting nervous or developmental abnormalities. None of these explanations could account for the subtle, consistent influence she seemed to exert over people's emotions. Without a clear diagnosis, her uniqueness was treated with caution or dismissed as imagination and exaggeration, further isolating her. Psychology, a field in its infancy, offered little clarity. The concept of emotional intelligence had not been formalized, and mental health conditions were poorly understood and stigmatized. Adults, witnessing Bella's effect on themselves or others, often lacked the vocabulary to describe it. What they felt could only be expressed as awe, fear, or suspicion. The lack of empirical evidence only fueled public speculation as neighbors and acquaintances were forced to interpret events without guidance from science. Any unusual response was attributed to morality, spirituality, or even superstition. Science's failure to provide answers left society vulnerable to exaggeration, and Bella became a living embodiment of the unexplained. Researchers of the era were limited by cultural biases, often overlooking children's perspectives or underestimating their capacities. Bella's intelligence, intuition, or emotional sensitivity may have been remarkable, but invisible to those who judged her strictly through adult expectations. The very lack of understanding made her appear even more extraordinary. Her family witnessed this confusion firsthand, navigating conflicting advice from physicians, clergy, and neighbors. No one could offer a solution, a label, or a way to normalize her experiences. In a society that prized conformity, scientific uncertainty was dangerous, leaving Bella and her family exposed to fear, rumor, and judgment. In the end, the scientific confusion of 1893 ensured that Bella Adams remained a mystery, not because she was unknowable, but because the world around her lacked the tools to comprehend her. Where medicine and observation failed, fear, superstition, and imagination stepped in, solidifying her reputation as a child no one could explain. The emotional impact Bella Adams had on those she met was profound and often unsettling, though it rarely involved overt actions. Adults, children, and even strangers reported feelings that lingered long after brief encounters. A single look from her eyes could evoke introspection, unease, or inexplicable sorrow. In a society that valued control and predictability, these emotional ripples were disconcerting, leaving people both fascinated and fearful. Her presence seemed to amplify hidden emotions, as if she reflected the inner state of those around her. A cheerful visitor might suddenly feel melancholy. A confident adult might experience doubt or vulnerability. These subtle effects were difficult to quantify or explain, but they were consistently observed. People began to believe Bella had an almost supernatural ability to reveal truths about human nature. Children were not immune to her influence, either. Playmates reported feeling awkward, nervous, or unusually contemplative in her presence. Games that normally encouraged laughter could turn quiet, and small interactions became laden with unexpected meaning. Adults interpreted these reactions as instinctive recognition of Bella's uniqueness, further deepening the sense of mystery surrounding her. Even long-term acquaintances felt lasting change, as if meeting Bella altered their perception of themselves or their surroundings. Neighbors and family friends often described leaving a conversation with her feeling introspective or emotionally unsettled, carrying a weight they could not identify. In a time before modern psychology, such experiences were frequently attributed to morality, spirituality, or the inexplicable. The emotional responses Bella provoked were a source of both admiration and fear, making people simultaneously drawn to her and wary of her influence. Her effect was subtle enough to avoid overt confrontation, but powerful enough to shape social interactions. Adults worried about what it meant that a child could elicit such feelings, questioning whether it was a blessing, a curse, or a warning. Her family observed these effects with a mixture of pride and anxiety, realizing that Bella's presence could inspire both wonder and discomfort. While they cherished her sensitivity, they could not shield her from the consequences of her impact on others. Community members' emotional reactions reinforced the growing belief that Bella was extraordinary and potentially dangerous in a world unprepared for such difference. Ultimately, the emotional influence of Bella Adams became inseparable from her identity, shaping how people perceived her long before they understood her. In 1893, a society ruled by belief and fear had little framework to interpret such effects, allowing her presence to be mystified, feared, and remembered as something truly unexplainable. Families who encountered Bella Adams often found their lives quietly but irreversibly changed, even after the briefest of interactions. Her presence seemed to touch something deep within people, stirring emotions and thoughts they could not fully articulate. A simple conversation, a shared glance, or even a moment in the same room could leave lasting impressions, subtly altering relationships, priorities, or perspectives. In 1893, when social and moral expectations were rigid, this influence was both fascinating and disconcerting. Parents frequently noticed shifts in their own behavior, sometimes reconsidering how they treated their children, spouses, or neighbors after observing Bella's interactions. Her sensitivity seemed to highlight flaws, fears, or overlooked truths, causing adults to reflect on choices they had long taken for granted. In communities where conformity was prized, such reflection could be unsettling, and some families quietly withdrew rather than confront these feelings. Children's lives were also affected, particularly those who played with or observed Bella. Shy or timid children reportedly gained confidence, while others became more cautious or thoughtful. The changes were subtle but cumulative, influencing personality, social dynamics, and family interactions. Even when adults failed to recognize it, Bella's presence created an emotional ripple effect that extended beyond individual encounters. Strangers sometimes altered life decisions after meeting her, according to accounts preserved in diaries and local records. Decisions about work, relationships, or moral conduct were reconsidered, often in ways the person could not fully explain. This phenomenon contributed to the aura of mystery surrounding Bella, as her influence seemed impossible to quantify or rationalize. Some families embraced her presence, believing that Bella's insight or emotional depth brought blessings or guidance. Others, however, became wary, unsure whether her influence was benign or disruptive. Community divisions emerged, with some households welcoming her and others avoiding any interaction, demonstrating the polarizing effect she could have even without speaking a word. The subtle changes Bella inspired were often cumulative, building over weeks, months, and years. Families found themselves unknowingly adopting new habits, reconsidering relationships, or quietly reevaluating their beliefs. These transformations rarely appeared dramatic from the outside, but were deeply felt by those who experienced them. In this way, Bella Adams' effect on families cemented her reputation as extraordinary, not through overt power or force, but through the quiet, persistent influence she exerted. In a society that valued conformity and feared the unknown, even small shifts in perception could leave lasting marks, and by 1893, Bella's name had become synonymous with the inexplicable changes she brought to every life she touched. Social isolation became an almost inevitable part of Bella Adams' life, as the community's reactions to her uniqueness created invisible barriers around her. People were simultaneously fascinated and fearful, unsure how to interact with a child who left such profound impressions. Invitations to gatherings were limited. Neighbors kept a polite distance, and even well-meaning adults often hesitated to engage with her. In a society that valued conformity and predictability, being different carried a real social cost. School and playtime were particularly challenging, as teachers and classmates struggled to categorize Bella within their expectations. While she was not overtly disruptive, her quiet presence and the emotional effect she had on others made interactions complicated. Children who once played freely began to avoid her, leaving Bella to navigate a world in which curiosity and caution collided. Loneliness became both a consequence of others' fear and a protective shield from potential misunderstanding. Family members felt the weight of this isolation, recognizing that Bella's uniqueness made ordinary social connections difficult. Friends drifted away, neighbors whispered, and the household grew increasingly insular. The very qualities that made Bella extraordinary also contributed to her exclusion, highlighting the paradox of being remarkable in a society unprepared for difference. Community rituals and events amplified the separation, as gatherings were often structured around conformity and predictable behavior. Bella's presence disrupted these expectations in subtle ways. Adults and children alike were emotionally unsettled, leaving the family to balance participation with self-protection. Over time, avoidance became normalized, reinforcing her status as other, without anyone needing to voice it. Rumors and fear fueled social boundaries, creating an environment where Bella's interactions were limited by collective caution rather than explicit malice. People preferred silence and distance over engagement, a reflection of a society quick to protect itself from the unknown. Isolation was both a symptom and a cause of the mystique that surrounded her, strengthening the perception of her as extraordinary. Despite this isolation, Bella developed a remarkable self-awareness, learning to navigate spaces carefully and observing human behavior with keen insight. Her social solitude may have sharpened her perception, giving her the ability to understand and influence others even when physically removed from them. Isolation, in this sense, was both a challenge and a tool. By the end of her childhood, social isolation had become a defining aspect of Bella Adams' life, shaping not only how she was perceived, but also how she interacted with the world. In 1893, being different carried consequences beyond fear or curiosity. Entire social networks could retract quietly, leaving a child to grow up in a world both fascinated by and distant from her. Media silence and lost records played a critical role in turning Bella Adams into a figure of enduring mystery, because very little contemporary documentation survived to explain her life. Unlike public figures or sensationalized cases of the era, Bella's story was largely confined to local memory, private letters, and oral accounts. Newspapers of the time rarely reported on children unless scandal or tragedy was involved, and those who wrote about unusual occurrences often exaggerated or distorted details, leaving gaps that were never filled. The absence of formal records meant that her story was shaped by perception rather than fact, allowing rumors, assumptions, and fear to dominate how she was remembered. Diaries and personal recollections offer tantalizing hints, but inconsistencies and omissions created an almost mythic quality. Every retelling emphasized different traits. Some focused on her eyes, others on her influence, still others on her family's reactions, making it impossible to reconstruct a complete, objective narrative. Media in 1893 was not designed to capture subtle human phenomena, particularly those involving emotional influence or social nuance. Print journalism thrived on sensationalism, but Bella's quiet presence did not produce headlines in the conventional sense. Stories of her extraordinary effect on others circulated privately, leaving very few tangible traces. The result was a historical void, where curiosity and imagination filled in the blanks. Local historians and family members attempted to preserve her story, but records were often lost to time, natural disasters, or neglect. Letters, journals, and personal testimonies were scattered, fragmented, or destroyed, either intentionally or accidentally. The fragments that survived only hint at the depth of her influence, providing glimpses rather than comprehensive accounts. This lack of media attention paradoxically enhanced her mystique, because the more unexplained a figure remained, the more extraordinary they appeared. Without public scrutiny or official documentation, Bella Adams became a canvas onto which fears, beliefs, and legends could be projected. Her life could be remembered as wondrous, unsettling, or even supernatural, depending on who told the story. Communities relied on memory and oral tradition, passing stories of Bella down through generations. Each retelling added interpretation, shaping her reputation further. Her influence on people was documented more in personal anecdotes than in formal records, ensuring that the narrative remained elusive and subject to embellishment. By the time historians began to piece together her life, Bella Adams had already become a symbol, rather than a fully known individual, a figure whose extraordinary presence and unexplainable effect were preserved in the imagination rather than the archives. In a world where documentation was limited, mystery became permanent, and Bella's legacy was secured as one of history's enduring enigmas. The unexplained nature of Bella Adams' influence was what truly set her apart, because no one, neither family, neighbors, nor local authorities, could identify why her presence affected people so deeply. Every attempt to rationalize her effect, whether through religion, science, or superstition, fell short. Adults felt emotions they could not name, children responded in unpredictable ways, and strangers carried an invisible weight after a single encounter. The source of this influence remained a mystery, and the lack of explanation only heightened the sense that Bella was extraordinary. People speculated endlessly about her abilities, suggesting that she could sense hidden truths, reflect inner emotions, or even manipulate feelings unconsciously. Some feared her, others revered her, but almost all agreed that she was unlike any child they had ever known. This universal uncertainty created a social paradox. Bella was both present and absent, known yet unknowable, shaping the lives of those around her without ever consciously doing so. Her unexplained influence extended to decisions and relationships as individuals reconsidered their choices after encountering her. Families altered routines. Adults questioned moral or personal decisions, and friends reconsidered bonds. Even when no conscious change occurred, people later reflected that Bella had shifted their perspective, revealing truths they had overlooked. No contemporary explanation satisfied the community, leaving open a space where imagination and rumor could flourish. Each unexplained effect became another reason for fascination or fear, solidifying Bella's reputation as a child who could not be understood. The absence of a clear cause allowed each encounter to become a story, growing with each retelling and spreading beyond immediate witnesses. Her influence was subtle yet persistent, leaving marks on memory and emotion rather than producing dramatic events. People did not report miracles or overt displays, but the quiet weight of her presence was undeniable. In a world that demanded rationality yet feared difference, such subtle power seemed almost supernatural. This inability to explain her created a feedback loop, where the more people tried to rationalize her, the more mysterious she became. Every theory, whether scientific, religious, or folkloric, failed to account for the emotional resonance she produced. In turn, this failure reinforced the notion that Bella Adams was a phenomenon beyond ordinary comprehension. Ultimately, the unexplained nature of her influence ensured that Bella Adams could never be ordinary, and that her story would endure precisely because it could not be fully captured or explained. In 1893, a society ruled by belief and fear found in her a living mystery, one that challenged understanding, reshaped perception, and left an indelible mark on everyone who crossed her path. By the end of her childhood, Bella Adams' story had become one of enduring mystery, not because of dramatic feats or public notoriety, but because of the cumulative effect of her life on those around her. Every glance, every word, every quiet interaction had left impressions that were impossible to explain. In a society like 1893 America, rigid, fearful, and obsessed with categorization, her existence defied understanding, making her legend almost inevitable. Her family carried the weight of her reputation, navigating both admiration and suspicion from their community. Friends and neighbors were drawn to her presence, yet hesitant to engage, creating a tension that shaped daily life. Bella's parents had to balance protecting her from misunderstanding while allowing her to grow into herself, a task complicated by a world that demanded conformity. Community memory preserved her story in fragments, passed down through whispered anecdotes, family recollections, and scattered records. Each retelling emphasized different qualities: her penetrating brown eyes, her emotional impact, or her quiet wisdom, ensuring that no single narrative could fully capture her essence. Over time, the legend grew as much as the reality, blending fact with interpretation. Her influence became part of local lore, the kind of story that evoked awe, fear, and curiosity simultaneously. Adults remembered the unease she inspired. Children recalled the subtle shifts in emotion she caused, and strangers who passed through carried stories of a girl who seemed far older than her years. In this way, Bella Adams became a touchstone for the unexplained. Despite, or perhaps because of, her isolation and difference, Bella developed a unique resilience, learning to navigate a world that could not understand her. Her quiet presence, her awareness, and her unintentional influence shaped her character, giving her an inner strength that was both remarkable and necessary. The combination of social fear, religious interpretation, and incomplete records ensured that her story remained untouchable by conventional explanation, cementing her place as a historical enigma. In a society ruled by belief and fear, Bella Adams exemplified what happens when a life cannot be contained by understanding, tradition, or expectation. Ultimately, Bella Adams' legacy is a testament to the power of the unexplained, a reminder that some lives leave marks not through fame or action, but through subtle influence, quiet presence, and the sheer impossibility of being fully known. Her story endures because it cannot be rationalized, only remembered, whispered, and wondered at. An extraordinary child who changed everyone she met and who continues to haunt history.